Okay, Jamie, please go ahead.
Wonderful. Should I go ahead and get started? I see our attendees are slightly growing. So I'm
Yes,
happy
I
to
think
give
you
it
can go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I am Jamie Deaton. I am with the National Center for Education Statistics at the U.S. Department of Education, and it is my honor and privilege to be with you in this virtual room today. We are scheduled for 75 minutes. My slides are scheduled, though, for probably closer to about 35 minutes or so. So that is just to say we have plenty of time for your questions, for your discussion, in what these results and what the National Indian Education Study might mean beyond its results to where you sit. So thank you again very much for joining me, and we can go on to the next slide. All right, let's advance it one more.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
All right, thank you very much for the disclaimer. So I am here today to talk about the 2022 National Assessment of Educational Progress results. That was the most recent time the National Assessment of Educational Progress was conducted, as well as the 2019 National Indian Education Study results, or NIES for short. The next National Assessment of Educational Progress will be conducted in 2024, and that will also include the next administration of the National Indian Education Study as well. So let's go on to the next slide. So first, let me give you a little overview about the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and we can go on to the next slide. It is also called NAEP for short. It is a congressionally mandated project administered by the National Center of Education Statistics. It is a common measure of student achievement across the country in a variety of subjects since 1969. So both the National Center for Education Statistics as well as NAEP predates the U.S. Department of Education, in fact, in NAEP's case by a little over a decade. And NAEP is often thought of as the gold standard of large-scale assessments. And let's go on to the next slide. So we have a couple of different goals for the NAEP program, and that is to inform educators, researchers, policymakers, and other stakeholders about academic progress in the United States. It is also to function as a common yardstick for states. As you're probably aware of, states do things differently. There is a state assessment in Florida, there is another state assessment in California. And how do we compare across those states, across two differing assessments? Well, we can't really do that. So that's kind of where NAEP has come in as a role. It is, a way to look at the big picture and to see how various states are doing by comparison across subjects, across grades, and also across populations of students, American Indian, Alaska Native students included. On NAEP as well as NIES, we also really value tracking trends in student performance over time. So in doing so, we're relatively cautious about our measures, and we want to have kind of the same or largely the same test questions, say, from year to year. And that way we can measure performance and progress and track changes over different periods of time in our country. And most recently, so much of the narrative has been around the unique and really difficult experiences around COVID-19 and what that means for learning. So what we'll be comparing here soon is NAEP results in 2022, after the pandemic began, compared to 2019, when we last administered NAEP in the first time, the last time, so to speak, pre-pandemic. All right, and we can go on to the next slide. Before we get into the results, I did want to give you an overview of the National Indian Education Study, and let's go on to the next slide. So there are two components of NIES. The first component is an assessment, and that's conducted through the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And those are the NAEP reports, academic performance in reading and mathematics. So the reading and math NAEP assessments have been going on since the 60s. American Indian Alaska Native students have been involved throughout the program's history. But one of the genesises or foundations of NIES is to be able to report more American Indian Alaska Native data, especially in terms of subgroups. We report out at national level for many of our assessments, and in doing so, we're able to report out results for subgroup that is American Indians, Alaska Natives. But of course, within that quote subgroup, there is such diversity. You all know well how many different federally recognized tribes there are, how many state recognized tribes there are. There are, American Indians, Alaska Native students, and our sample comes from such a variety of places, Bureau of Indian Education schools to schools in large urban districts as well. So really NIES kind of came from a place of wanting to report out more data whenever possible specific to American Indians, Alaska Natives. And also a key component of NIES is the survey. And there is an NIES specific survey administered to American Indian, Alaska Native students, their teachers, and their school administrators. And with that, we can go on to the next slide. One of the things that we're really cautious about doing with the results is not drawing, too hard at conclusions. And really our role and my role with the study is to get the data in the hands of people like you that are at the ground level, that know, your students best, that spend days in classroom settings and in educational settings. So when we have NIES results, the National Center for Education Statistics will work with our partners, especially Office of Indian Education, to make sure that Native communities are aware of these results. How you can access them, how, the tools that are available. One thing that we will not do and never do is say, the results say X, you should do Y. We really think that educators, are experts, and they're experts in their own students. And in having that expertise, you all know what to do best. So want to get the results out there, but then also want to trust the educators first and foremost. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. I mentioned before that NAEP is often considered the gold standard in assessments. And the NAEP program has experts. We have psychometricians, we have many doctorates. But for NIES to work, it really needs to have validity and credibility in the eyes of Native communities. And we need to be mindful and aware of who our partners are and help our partners lead these efforts. So it is just not a study that studies Native populations and Native students, but it is a study that is led by and guided by Native educators, classroom teachers, and Native scholars as well. So with that, we have a couple of government partners, especially, as I mentioned, the Office of Indian Education. We also have the White House Initiative on American Indian Alaska Native Education. And within the U.S. Department of Interior, we work closely with the Bureau of Indian Education as well. When the study first began in 2005, about a quarter of BIE schools serving grades 4 and 8 were in the NIES sample. Starting through in 2007 and planned next year, when we administer NIES again, all Bureau of Indian Education schools serving grades 4 and 8 will be in our sample. Doesn't mean they all participate, but historically our participation rates have been really, really good. We also have the members of our NAES technical review panel. They provide essential guidance for this study. And that guidance is at the start, and it's also at the finish line and beyond too. Start meaning They provide input on our survey questionnaires. We are making a couple of revisions to our survey questionnaires for all respondent groups in 2024. The last time our survey was developed was in line with the 2015 NIS administration. In fact, that was the last time the study was conducted paper pencil. In 2017, NAEP transitioned the math and reading assessments to a digital-based platform. And I'm happy to talk more about that during the open discussion as well at the end, and answer any questions, have comments on that. And then also wanted to mention Tribal Tech, who is a Native woman-owned business, and they handle the recruitment of all Bureau of Indian Education schools. And they also help put the study in the hands of American Indian Alaska Native stakeholders across the country. For example, many of our reports at the National Center for Education Statistics are digital only these days. We have web reporting only. We have been pretty intentional about wanting to keep hard copies of the NIS reports, because we want to make sure they get in the hands of stakeholders that might have a little less easy access to the web. So for example, we have printed copies of both the NIS report and a companion document. The icon is in the lower left, that's setting the context document that the technical review panel authored. And both of those, the companion document and the report itself, have been sent to a wide variety of entities. All federally recognized tribes got a report. All state recognized tribes got a report. Bureau of Indian Education, stakeholders, tribal colleges and universities, Native focused media, and so on. And with that, let's go on to the next slide. So the last report that was on the 2019 study was released in May 2021, and it focused primarily on two themes. Those themes being, to what extent are American Indian Alaska Native culture and language part of the curricula, and what is the overall education context for American Indian Alaska Native students in the United States. In doing so, one of the other things that we wanted to be very intentional about is to show the diversity of American Indian Alaska Native student population, both diversity in terms of student achievement, as well as a diversity in terms of experiences, both in school and outside of school, as it relates to the students' language and culture. We can go on to the next slide. So we had pretty robust participation. This is the largest nationally representative study of American Indians, Alaska Natives, and these numbers are rounded to the nearest 100. But you can see among the students assessed in 2019, it included over 8,000 students at grade 4 when we count reading and math, and 7,500 students at grade 8. This also included nearly 5,000 teachers across both grades and approximately 2,500 school administrators on the survey across both grades. All right, let's go on to the next question, or next slide. So for the NIS report, we focus on results across the nation for selected states, and I'll be talking about that in the next slide. But I do want to make a point that, regardless of which state people are in, every state counts, and every state contributes to a variety of reporting, and that includes those states that were not even able to report state-specific results for. We also focus on 3 types of schools, those being low-density public schools, and these are schools that public schools that have less than 25% American Indian Alaska Native students. And in fact, that's where most of our sample comes from. Also, high-density public schools, where more than 25% of the student population is American Indian Alaska Native, as well as Bureau of Indian Education schools, which, approximately probably 99 to 100% of those schools have American Indian students. All right. We also report reading and mathematics performance by average scale scores and also by achievement levels. There are 3 achievement levels on NAEP as set by our independent bipartisan National Assessment Governing Board. And those are NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, NAEP Advanced. I should say that not all students in our assessment across racial ethnic groups, not just American Indian Alaska Natives, even meet the NAEP basic level. So these kids would be classified as below basic. And I'll also say our NAEP achievement levels tend to be more rigorous than what we have at the state level. So they are different as well, too. All right, and I see we have a question that I want to get about including California in future reports. And I want to get to that on a slide really, really soon, but I'm going to hold on that question in just a moment. Performance is also differentiated by Native students within our report as performing at or above the 75th percentile and below the 25th percentile, referred to subsequently as higher and lower performing. And this is relative to the performance of American Indian Alaska Native students. And let's go on to the next slide. Okay, good. I was hoping it would be the slide with the California question. So when the study first started in 2005, we had results for the 7 states in light blue: Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Alaska. And the 2005 study, similar to all of our NIES studies, have always had a national level sampling. And the NAEP reporting rule for any subgroup, regardless of what the subgroup is we need at least 62 students across at least 5 schools to report out specific results. So all the states that you can see on the map, which are 15 total states, we most recently added Nebraska in 2019, have a subgroup number that includes American Indian Alaska Native students that meet those statistical standards. So we're able to report their results. And fortunately, as you can see from this map, we have steadily grown the number of states over time. One of the other things, independent of NIS and independent of NAEP, that we are closely monitoring as well is the Office of Management and Budget is reviewing and potentially revising how it collects race ethnicity. So this is a big government-wide conversation. I know there has been tribal consultations a couple months ago that I've been aware of, and there's been a comment period. I have met with a number of groups in this regard, including the National Advisory Council on Indian Education, the State Indigenous Education Leaders Network, and a couple other groups as well, including our NIS Technical Review Panel. That's all to say that changes might be coming in terms of how one collects and how the government collects race ethnicity. One of the things that I've heard across groups is we should always make sure that Native identity is counted. And any selection in another category, such as Hispanic, should not discount other selections. So what this might mean potentially is, as standards are revised, hopefully, this map might look even a little bit different, and it might look a little bit more inclusive as well. I find this question about how we include California in future reports just super relevant, and it is asked in many of my NIS presentations. And I think one of the challenges, especially with a state like California, is the overall number of American Indians and Alaska Natives in their state is enormous. By overall number, it's one of the largest states overall. One of the challenges for us is how, I would say evenly dispersed that Native population is. So that represents real challenge for us to get that data. Generally speaking, we can report out AIAN specific results if a state's percentage of students is over 1% Native. So, in the case of Wyoming, the number of Native students in Wyoming is a lot smaller than California. But The percentage of students that are Native in Wyoming is about 3%. So through oversampling, it's pretty easy to get there with Wyoming. Before any NIES study, we will always work and relook at, what we think we can get, and whenever possible, we will try to add another state. But in doing so, we also want to make sure that students and schools feel valued across this map. And I think, we're more and more mindful of, the other 35 states, so to speak, that contribute to BIE level results in many cases. They contribute to other results such as low density results, high density results, student results. Those are, in the 75th percentile or above in terms of achievement, or 25th percentile below in terms of achievement. So it's a challenge. It is an ongoing challenge to make sure that more states are representative. And as we work through those challenges, I wish I could promise more concrete answers. But I think the one thing we have to do is continue to amplify the value of everyone participating, including those states that are much less likely to be able to achieve those statistical standards for reporting state level results. So with that, I want to go on to the next slide. All right, in October of last year, I think it was October 24th on a Monday, we released NAEP 2022 results. And this was collected. The NAEP 2022 was assessed reading and math grades 4 and 8 in January through March of 2022. So, when the pandemic had been underway, it was, I think, when the Omicron variant was spiking. So it was, as you can imagine, it was an enormous challenge to do this assessment. We're really grateful for our participants. This was initially going to be a 2021 data collection, but obviously where we were with COVID, that did not allow for that. So it was moved back a year. So let's go on to the results. Let me go on to the next slide. So what we have here, and this is just one snapshot of many, and a lot more can be seen on our homepage as well, is we're looking at something that has persisted over time. And that is a gap in performance between students that are non-American Indian Alaska Native compared to American Indian Alaska Native students at both grades 4 and 8. So what you see on this slide is reading at the top. So these are the non-Native students. You see an asterisk. So what these asterisks mean is, compared to that 2018 level of performance, all the previous score results through 2005 are significantly higher. So significant decline at the top. And because this represents such a large percentage of our population, what you see is even one data point, 2019, presumably with rounding might be slightly different, but it's presumably just 1 point above 2018, and that is significantly different result. This is the gap, and one of the things you don't see within this gap is any asterisks. So what this means is that score gap among non-American Indians, Alaska Natives has maintained from 2005 to 2022. And with reading at grade 8, you see the numbers are slightly different, but we see, generally speaking, the pattern remains the same. And with that, I want to go on to the mathematics results. So same general layout, and again, no real change in the gap, but what we do see in both areas at the top and then below is some significant declines in performance. And I think that's to be expected when we're looking at 2019 results compared to 2022. So 2019 pre-pandemic, 2022 post start of the pandemic as well. All right. And from here, let's go on to the next slide. And this is looking at declines across race ethnicity groups. So when we see a down arrow, that notes a significant difference. And what we see really across groups is a similar pattern of performance across all groups listed, except for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. We see a significant decline at mathematics for grade 4. And then we can go on to the next slide. This is mathematics at grade 8. We don't see a statistically significant decline here for American Indians, Alaska Natives. In 2019, American Indian Alaska Natives had a score 262. Most recent score in 2022 of 258 is quoted difference of 4 points, but it is not significantly different. All right, and from here, let's go on to the next slide. So here we have reading results. Again, similar pattern, decline for American Indian Alaska Native students that is significant, and significant declines for other racial ethnic groups, including Black students, Hispanic students, and white students. All right, now let's see reading grade 8. And in this case, the only significant decline we're seeing is for white students, as indicated by the arrow for that group. Okay, and we can go on to the next slide. And NIES was not administered in 2022, last administered in 2019. But even during our non-NIES years, when we're conducting NAEP in reading and math at grades 4 and 8, we often can still report state level results for American Indian Alaska Natives for a handful of states. And these includes the 7 that we have listed that we're able to report AIN results at both subjects in both grades. So here you see kind of the pattern of performance. At the top, you see national public. That includes all students of races, ethnicities. So here we see declines at grade 4, both subjects, grade 8, both subjects. Here, we're looking at trends just specific for American Indians, Alaska Native students, both for national public, as well as for these 7 states listed. As you can imagine, with smaller groups, when we report out, we have bigger standard errors. So you do have some cases where we have presumably double-digit declines. I see 2 in reading at grade 4 for both Oklahoma and South Dakota, where we have a presumed drop in points, but it is not significant. And I want to stop here, and there's several questions, so I want to look at those briefly too. So navigate data sovereignty with local tribes when you acquire data from tribal students. So does IES hold tribal consultation with tribes that are within 50-mile radius of the schools you're using for data acquisition? So one of the things that we do work closely with is we do work with review boards. For example, over the years, I have worked really closely with the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board. And that includes a meeting with them and giving presentations they have a research conference that they do every other fall. And, it also ensures maintaining privacy too. Approximately a third of the schools in a Bureau of Indian Education sample are Navajo Nation BIE schools. So to hit our reporting standards of 70%, that means we have to have the support of Navajo Nation to get that, given how much they are. And I think, the key for us is to make sure we maintain the privacy of participants in our study. And it's also to make sure that we just get it in the hands of tribes and that we are really data collectors. And we want to do right by tribal communities. So that means working with tribes, getting it to tribes, making presentations at a variety of venues. I mentioned the Navajo Nation Research Conference, but we also do some at the National Congress of American Indians NADA, their annual meeting. We have regularly gone and continue to do so, the National Indian Education Association convention and trade show. And we've done a couple other venues as well. Too. I think one that is coming up that Tribal Tech is attending is there is an Indigenous Teachers Education Conference in Flagstaff later this month too. Other ones that I'm seeing, so does IES take into account that our Native students are relatively new to public schools? So I think that's important too, to kind of contextualize how different subgroups are. And we have some survey questions that might be able to inform performance of all students, and that's just not on the NIES survey, but the NAEP survey as well. And one of the measures or constructs that we are exploring too is mobility of students. We know typically that students that switch schools more and have more disruptions to their education, that can have an effect on student performance as well too. So also see another question in the chat, and that does this is really relevant too, is does OMB and IES note that tribes are a political entity, not a race? And I think that is something that we've heard and that I know has been made during the public comment period. One of the things that in meeting with multiple groups of Native stakeholders is one of the things that they pointed out is the proposed working definition that OMB has of the category of American Indians, Alaska Natives, how their operation in fact is thought of as kind of overly inclusive and too inclusive. And it is including Indigenous people of both Canada and Indigenous people of South America. And the distinction that our state education leaders have made too is tribes in the United States have a government-to-government relationship with the United States. And so there are issues there, and there are distinctions there that need to be taken into account when revising and looking at these race ethnicity standards as well. So thank you very much for this, these questions thus far. So let's go on to the next slide. So 2019 NIES results. These were released in May 2021. This was the last time NIES was conducted prior to the pandemic beginning in 2020. So as I mentioned before, but just as a reminder, NIES will next be conducted in 2024, so next year. All right, let's go to the next slide. So these are trends and scores for grade 4 reading by school type, mutually exclusive school types. Low density public schools, these of course have 25% or less American Indians, Alaska Natives. High density public schools, 25% or more American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Bureau of Indian Education schools. A couple of things that you see over time here in grade 4 reading is real stability across these groups. One of the things you really don't see are many asterisks noting changes in performance. We see a couple of asterisks, 2007 for BIE, 2009 for BIE. So what this means is their score of 186 in 2019 was significantly higher than their score of 181 in 2009, significantly higher than their score of 180 in 2007. You do not see a data point in 2015 for BIE for grade 4. We just missed that statistical standard for being able to report their results, unfortunately. We did include all that data though in our national level average as well too. So we will work hard to be able to meet that standard like we did in 2019. So let's go on to the next grade. For grade 8 reading, we did meet the standards in all years that you see. And again, you don't see that much change. Just a couple asterisks on the slide. We see a slight dip in performance for high density public schools in 2019 compared to their performance in 2015, the most recent assessment compared to 2019, and then 2009. We see a slight improvement in 2019 for BIE schools as compared to the earliest years on the graph, 2007 and 2009. So let's look at grade 4 mathematics on the next slide. So again, real stability, little bit of improvement for BIE schools in 2019 compared to the earliest points on the graph, 2007, 2009. Let's go to the next slide. Grade 8 mathematics. Again, the only asterisk is that 2007 performance for BIE school. So there's been a little improvement over time. All right. And let's go to the next slide. So 2019 survey questionnaires. All right, we can go on from here. So the content of the NIES survey kind of focuses on a couple of different things: integration of culture and language into curricula, availability of resources, the use of assessment information, the involvement of tribes, villages, or groups within schools, and then students, teachers, and school administrators' feelings about education. I should mention too that one of, as I mentioned, NAEP and NIS really values being able to measure a trend over time. And for our test questions, meaning questions in mathematics and reading, we keep this secure. So we don't release them all at once because we want to reuse them and best measure trend. Survey questions represent a nice contrast. We don't have those security questions. So in fact, we make our NIS similar to our NAEP survey questions available, publicly available, even before we conduct our study. And they are on our website now. Also wanted to note that survey questions are not copyrighted either. So occasionally researchers reach out to me and they ask what is kind of the government procedure to get permission to use our survey questions for their own work. And the nice answer is those researchers are free to do so immediately, and they can just cite us depending on what is most appropriate for them and whatever style guide they happen to be using. So that is a very quick and easy answer of yes, you do have permission to use our survey questions. You also have permission to adapt our survey questions for your own studies where you best see fit. So let's go on to the next slide. One of the things that we looked at too is kind of some overarching demographic information, with the recognition that there is a range of student population when we are just looking at American Indian Alaska Native students only. So, for example, looking at eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, just as one data point, 96% of BIE students from BIE schools are eligible. So that is significantly different than it is compared to that 88%, which is still a really high number in high density public schools. And it's significantly different than the 67%, which is still, again, a significantly high number. We also see differences in other variables, such as those students that have more than 100 books in the home and report having a computer in the home. One of the things that I mentioned, earlier in this presentation is that we converted our assessment and NIS to a digital-based platform. And to quote, level the playing field, our field staff still brings in all our own equipment. So what that means for students, both, our native students taking NAEP as well as all students taking NAEP, is they're taking it on a common device. I believe most recently we've used Surface Pros 3s and 4s. I say that, but I also want to just be acknowledging and transparent of what we cannot control for and that we need to be mindful of is the student experience with technology prior to us coming in on administration day, in knowing that there is a host in a variety of differences in experience that students have in technology prior to us kind of level the playing field, so to speak. So we really know that. And on the NAEP survey questionnaires, we do specifically focus on a couple of measures as it relates to technology use as well. So let's go on with that. All right. So we also asked, a wide variety of questions on the NIES survey. And And one of the things we asked at the grade 8 is, how much do you know about your American Indian tribe or Alaska Native group? It says, for example, you may know about the history, traditions, or arts and crafts of your group or tribe. And the response options were, I know nothing, a little, some, or a lot. And, this is something that I think, casts a pretty positive light on students in Bureau of Indian Education schools. And, maybe it's not surprising that students in Bureau of Indian Education schools probably have more experience and more opportunities with their history, traditions, and so on. But this is a survey question like this is a way to really quantify this. So, for example, BIE school students were significantly less likely to answer nothing. They knew nothing, and significantly more likely to answer that they knew a lot compared to their peers in high density and low density public schools. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. We also asked at grade 8, who taught you most of what you know about American Indian Alaska Native history? And what's interesting to see is some stability in some of the response options, like virtually the same percentages for those that answered family members across low density public schools, were 59% said family members taught me the most. High density, 61% said family members. BIE said 59% said family members. But it does differ for other categories, such as no one has taught me about American Indian Alaska Native history. In this case, only 2% of BIE students said that. So only about 1 in 50 students from BIE schools, compared to 5% of students in high density public schools, and compared to more than 1 in 10 students at low density public schools. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So this is another way that we've shown results in the NIS 2019 report. Is, as I mentioned before, we're looking at higher performing and lower performing American Indian Alaska Native students by selected factors. So, one of the things that this shows is, if we're looking at higher performing American Indian Alaska Native students, of those students, over 90% reported having internet access in their home. 93% of those students reported having this at grade 4 reading, 95% reported at grade 8 reading, 93% reported this at grade 4 math, 95% at grade 8 math. So this is significantly higher than those in the lower performing group. So, we really see, across these areas, some significant difference. The home having more than 100 books. This is, again, these 2 questions, the internet access and the 100 books in the home, or more, we ask of all students, not just Native students. But, when we compare just Native students, we're seeing some real differences in performance. So with that, let's go into the next slide. All right. We also, in addition to individual survey questions, this report also provides combined results across multiply conceptually related survey questions in the form of composite variables. And a couple of composite variables were featured in this report: cultural knowledge, interest in reading about cultures, engagement at school, perceptions about effort in school. And to create these composites, yes, we worked with our psychometricians and our statisticians to make sure that they were statistically sound, but we also needed to make sure that they were content sound. So, we worked really closely with our experts on our National Indian Education Study technical review panel as well, to make sure that they had a face validity and a conceptual validity, so to speak, as well. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So I just want to focus right now on just one of them, even though they're all featured in the report. So this is about effort in school, and this composite is constructed from 4 related survey questions for 8th graders. So in the first 3 questions, 8th graders indicated the extent to which they agreed that if they put in enough effort, they would succeed in school, get into college, get a good job. And then the final question that made up this composite We asked students to the extent to which the things they were learning in school would prepare them for the lives they wanted to lead in the future. So this is the context. Let's go on the next slide for the results. So what you see here is how did eighth graders perceive the impacts of putting in effort at school in 2019. So, and you see a little bit differences in performance where, significantly higher students in BIE schools fell into that strongly agree bucket, meaning they strongly agreed with the survey statements about effort in school that, yes, it would make a perceived difference. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. And this is something that I'm really excited about. And this was such a long time coming, and it required kind of a lot of advocacy, especially from our technical read panel, to get this out the door. And this is the NIES Qualitative Data Companion. So I'll talk about this more in the next slide. And so we have long collected, but as a statistical agency, we kind of struggled to report these open-ended NIES survey questions. And at the end of both the student questionnaire and the teacher questionnaire, we had open-ended questions. And for our student sample size, we asked students the same questions regardless of grades, grade 4 and 8. Teacher the same questions regardless of grades they teach, grades 4 and 8. So really robust sample size numbers. So, this entails about 9,800 responses of students across grades and over 5,000 teacher respondents across grades too. So let's see what questions we asked first, and I'll go into just, a high level sampling results. So let's go to the next slide. We asked students 2 open-ended questions at the end of the survey. So this is the very last thing they did when they participated in NIS. We said, first question, if you know the name of the American Indian tribe or Alaska Native group that you belong to or enrolled in, or if you think you know it, please write it in the box below. Do not worry about spelling. If you belong to more than one American Indian tribe or Alaska Native group, write the names of as many as you know. We also asked students, what else would you like to say about yourself, your school, or about American Indian or Alaska Native people? Use the box to write in your ideas. Let's see what we asked teachers on the next slide. We asked teachers, what have you found to be the most effective teaching and learning strategies for increasing the achievement of your American Indian or Alaska Native students? And then finally, we asked teachers, in the space below, please share with us your thoughts about any other important issues about your students, school, or community that are related to student academic performance, student aspirations, or other educational matters. So I just want to share some results first. So let's go to the next slide. And before I, share the specifics of these results, I want to say that we did post the qualitative data companion file. It is publicly available on the NIS homepage, so anyone can use it. You don't even need a secure data license for doing so. Before we posted it, we did look at all the responses, and we redacted any response that has personally identifiable information. So if a student were to say something like, I go to Martin Luther King Elementary and I love reading, we would revise that to I go to, and then in brackets, we would put school name and I like reading. So anything that we need to redact, we'll put that in brackets, and then we will we put out as much of that student response as possible. With that context, now let me talk about these, just these sampling of responses. So, I see a couple things from these. We see a wide variety of just spelling for Ojibwe. So one is Ojibwe Iroquois, maybe Ojibwe, and Ojibwe with a question mark. We get some students that say a lot more than just a tribe. We see here a student writes, I am Blackfeet and I come to school to learn about my tribe, family, and how we came and became the tribe we are today. And I love learning more about the tribe and stories about others' tribes like the Crow. And we just wanted to put this out here as is. So we're not going to correct any spelling or an interpretation. And we see some really different things. This, we asked students name of tribe again. One student wrote, I like to play volleyball and to play basketball. And then finally we see, I don't know. So we get, even within a pretty direct question like name of tribe, we get a wide sampling of respondents. And one of the things with this is that, I think this is a great resource for people that are potentially looking at doing a dissertation. To do a dissertation, one needs to write a dissertation. They don't necessarily need to collect their own data for a dissertation. So this is a data set in the making. In fact, I was working with a researcher earlier today about a dissertation idea related to this as well. So certainly encourage studies and to get this data and promote this data out there, especially within Native communities, because it is readily available. No secure data license required. So from this slide, let's go to grade 8 student responses. So we asked students for this final question, what else would you like to say? We got so many different responses. Student here wrote, we lost our culture. The second response is really reflective to so many of the students in the survey, is that since there's not a lot of Native Americans that go to my school, I think it would be better to add a Native language or history class for the people that are natives. And one of the interesting things when we used to conduct this study on paper pencil is that students in low density public schools felt a little bit more awkward and maybe a little bit more called out on, because they were sitting at their desk completing NAEP and later completing NIS with a physical NIS survey questionnaire booklet that their peers didn't have, their non-Native peers didn't have. So having to ask Native students to do this additional exercise as part of the NAEP administration, that was something that we're mindful of and wanted to do so in, the most comfortable way, in a way that students didn't feel like called out on or in the spotlight. And we heard a lot less about this once we transitioned to digital-based format, because students are completing NAEP, and in the case of Native students, completing the NIES survey after, with a Surface Pro in front of them and with earbuds in their ears connected to their laptops. And for health reasons, we also just allow students to keep their earbuds after the assessment. But one of the things that earbuds does, along with this digital-based assessment, is it gives the kids kind of a tunnel vision in a kind of the best meaning of the term, and they are much more focused on what is going on within their own respective administration experience, as opposed to what a student might be doing to the left or to the right of them, to the front of them, or behind them. So we did get significantly fewer observations in the field about kids kind of feeling more called out on having to do NIS after the fact. And then you see another hosting of responses, on the screen, that's such a wide range from, I think school is boring, the only reason I go to school is to see my friends, to I love K-pop with 6 exclamation marks after K-pop. So from here, let's look at a sample of grade 4 teacher responses. So this is we asked teachers effective strategies for teaching American Indian Alaska Native students. And this first bullet really kind of resonated with me. It's something that I've shared with, a lot of others as well. And we'd get some responses to the fact of, I don't have any American Indian or Alaska Native students in my classroom. And in fact, these teachers that say that are from kids that are in our sample, that are in our NIS sample, that are designated as American Indian Alaska Native students. So I think what this speaks to is that Native students in some of our classrooms, and I would venture to guess that they're more likely to be in classrooms of low density public schools, are not being seen for their Native identities by their teachers that teach them, every day or every day of the school year. And with that, there might be perceptions of teachers of, this is what Native students look like. And, in having these perceptions, they are not recognizing that, yes, in fact, they do have Native students, and they do have Native students in their classrooms every day. So That is, it's hard to read these things like that, and it's also kind of a call to action. Also pragmatically, it's affected how we do reporting over the years. I think one of the things that we've shifted to in the NIS hard copy reports is, instead of maybe more pictures of students, we've also kind of shifted overall to more pictures of landscapes, because we found that, to be inclusive of these are how all students look like, that is really, really challenging. And for other students or other educators to see pictures of maybe one native student or two native students, that's kind of reductionary, or certainly not reflective of what all students look like, or the range of what students look like. So, landscapes kind of represent more people's, and they can be something that more people can associate with, because it represents more. So, with that context, we see some other responses as well. And I really liked that this third response, let them tell their story, their truth in each activity. So with that, I'm about done, but I want to shift to the grade 8 responses. This is very open-ended. We asked teachers' thoughts about any other issues. So a couple of things that we see here is students are very media driven. I work hard to include technology in the classroom to increase student engagement. Second response shown here is, my kids are as smart as kids anywhere if you measure them with the right measuring stick. And I think this kind of speaks to us in that, when we create our assessments and when we engage in that process to create assessments, we need to make sure that when we are working on a product that will ultimately evaluate, so to speak, or be administered to students and teachers and schools, we need to make sure we evaluate that product we put in front of them. So that includes pilot tests, that includes cognitive labs or for surveys, to make sure that our surveys and our assessments are inclusive, and representative and accessible to a wide host, in order so we can best measure that people interpret what we're asking in ways that we're intending them, and also that they're accessible to as many kids as we can do, to best measure performance, to best measure experience via the survey questionnaires. So, and with that, we can go to the next slide. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I also wanted to mention that all the data that I shared today is publicly available. So really want to thank you all for joining the session, especially. We have, as I mentioned before, we've worked hard to get the NIS 2019 report out into a host of Native stakeholders, as well as the NIS setting the context document. I also am happy to send and to work with our contractor Tribal Tech to send reports to you, for you and for your communities as well too. So let me put my email address in the chat, and you can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to help provide that. I go by Jamie. My official name is James, so that will be in that'll be one that you'll want to use if you contact me via email too. So I'm happy to entertain any questions as well, but I'm also happy to just open it up on kind of a larger scale about how we connect NIES and these NAEP results that we measured in grades 4 and 8 with where you sit, which I'm just going to assume extends certainly beyond just two grades 4 and 8, into many other grades as well on the education spectrum. And I will also, I will go and I will put the NIS study homepage. I will put that in the chat too as an additional resource, just so you can get there too. So just give me a moment to do that. And I just want to thank you all again for joining. I know there's some other wonderful sessions going out on throughout these days, including some other really great sessions now. I'm glad that they're being recorded so I can go back later and check them out. So thank you for your time and for choosing this one among the other options that we've offered. So thank you again very much. And feel free to contact me anytime. Doesn't need to be today. It can be tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. So again, thank you so much.